Welcome, everybody. We start this webinar about the German Nature Awareness Study, which is organized by the WSL Landscape Center. I'm very happy about the many participants who have registered. There are almost 100 people who want to listen to this webinar, and therefore we do it as a webinar. Now we can start with our first speaker, with Beate Jessel. Most of you know her. She is our new director at WSL. She studied landscape management at the Technical University of Munich in Weihenstephan, and she holds the chair of strategy and management in landscape development at this Technical University of Munich. She was a professor of landscape planning at the University of Potsdam, and then from November 2007 on until last year, she was the president of Germany's Federal Agency for Nature Conservation, and she was also the big leader of this nature awareness study. And as you all know, since 1st of September last year, she is the director of WSL. So Beate, the floor is yours. Let's try sharing the screen.
Yeah, I try. And I hope you can hear and see and understand me.
Yes, thank you.
So it's fine. Then I try to share. So I just have to move the icon.
Slides.
Yeah. So.
Okay,
well, so we can start. So thank you, Sylvia. Just to say it correctly, I was not the project leader of this project, but the nature awareness studies were one of many projects in my former agency. And we, that is today me and my former colleague, Dr. Andreas Muss, we would like to give you today some insight in these German nature awareness studies. I say it's in the plural because these public surveys are scientific studies series. Which is conducted since 2009 in a 2-year cycle by my former institution, the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation. The German abbreviation is BFN. You will see the logo later also on the slides, and the Federal Ministry for the Environment. Well, our presentation will consist of 2 parts. First, I will give an insight into political and strategic background of the studies and present some core results. And then Andreas, he will rely to the theoretical and conceptual framework and the methodological background of the studies. The scope of my presentation will include some remarks why to assess awareness and about the strategic background. Also some remarks on concepts and methods. This will be Andreas' parts, but you need some knowledge to understand how the results came about. Then presentation of some selected results. I will concentrate on awareness on biological diversity and the attitudes towards wilderness on the one hand and urban nature on the other hand, and some take home. As just mentioned, these studies, they are already running since 2009. So far, 6 issues are available and the 7th is just under preparation. And so we can give you only a very brief insight into some selected aspects. If you are interested in further information, the full reports, they are all available in English and in German in the net. And also what is also available are further scientific background reports with further in-depth analysis. Well, why to assess awareness? Implementation on different levels, be it of policy and regulations, of materials and technologies, be it in different societal groups up to individual behavior, it all depends on social practice. Yeah, this is a real cross-cutting issue, and which touches almost every field in nature conservation and also elsewhere. And finally, which is finally ending by individual behavior that is influenced by attitudes, norms, and habits. Thus, collectively, the nature awareness studies represent an enormous fund of knowledge we could use to underpin our arguing as Agency for Nature Conservation in different fields of nature conservation in the science policy interface. As for the strategic background, that is first the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. One of the so-called Aichi targets is also related to nature awareness. By 2020, which has already been passed, but it's still a target, people should be more aware about the wellness of biodiversity and the steps they can take and use it sustainably. Then we have the German National Strategy on Biological Diversity. It already dates from 2007, and currently a relaunch is under preparation. It contains also one target about nature awareness, that by the year 2017, well, it has also been passed, but the strategy is still true as the strategy dates from 2007, a reasonable amount of the population shall rate the conservation of biological diversity as one of the top priorities concerning attitudes, knowledge, and also willingness to act. And there are also needs for science-based policy advice on current topics. Let us say for each study, we identified current topics to be investigated along with our ministry for the environment. They told us their needs for policy advice. We discussed this and included what was possible, their question in our studies. And the results were then usually presented together with the acting minister for environment in a public press conference. As for concept and methods of the studies, it is a representative nationwide study, including about 2,000 respondents, a random sample from the German population. There has been a pre-testing in advance, and these 2,000 were carried out by face-to-face interviews. They included, on the one hand, established questions for monitoring related to general attitudes, awareness of biological diversity, and on the other hand, for each study, new questions dealing with current topics that were protected areas, digitization, and species knowledge for the last study that has been published in 2019, but also in former studies, marine nature conservation, agrarian landscape, wilderness, or perception of landscape changes. It's briefly also to mention that in 2020, we carried out our first youth nature awareness study that was a representative survey of nature awareness among young people aged between 14 and 17. And the study served for monitoring of socio-demographic groups and socio-cultural stratification of society that is based on the so-called social milieus concept that has been developed by the Sinus Institute. Here you see these milieus. This Sinus milieu is a scientifically based social model that is also broadly used in public opinion polls. Andreas will tell further details later. In contrast to traditional stratification and lifestyle models, it is based on a socio-cultural classification that includes 10 different social milieus. For example, the established conservative, the new middle class, or the escapist milieu. They are mentioned here with the percentages from the German population. These different milieus are based on values that are determined by lifestyle and life goals. Further details will give you Andreas, and I will just focus on some results. But what is just important to recognize is that these milieus are situated in a plane, as you see here, that is spanned by two axes. That is the basic sociocultural orientation and the social situation. The higher a milieu is located in this graph, the more upscale is its social class in terms of characteristics such as education, income, or occupational group. And the further to the right is situated, the more modern is its basic orientation in a socio-cultural sense. As for the social indicator awareness of biological diversity, you see here the results of the distribution among the milieus. The Sinus model shows a clear stratification among the different milieus. The members of the milieus with a higher social status, the so-called, for instance, the liberal intellectual milieu, the established conservative milieu, the socio-ecological, and the high achiever milieu, that is their terms. They most often meet the requirements of the awareness indicator, but in comparison, the values of the precarious and the traditional milieus are significantly lower. That is here the dark green in the graph. And it is what I would like to stress, it is this clear stratification between the upper and the lower milieus that runs like a red thread through the studies, touching very different topics, thus as you see here, for instance, that is the amount of agreement with, of the German population with energy transition. Over the years, Germans continue to be predominantly behind energy transition to renewables over 10 years. And here I chose the survey, for instance, from 2017. The level of approval was always around more or less 60% who considered the energy revolution to be correct. 30% in total were undecided, only 7% positioned themselves against it. And when we consider quite another topic, it's here the attitudes towards the deployment of genetically modified organisms in agriculture. There is quite a similar picture. In Switzerland, we have a moratorium at a time about this, but also discussion is starting. So an insight might be interesting. A comparison between the milieus shows the member of the escapist and precarious milieus to have the least problems with genetical engineering in agriculture. And in contrast to this, rejection is greatest among the members of the social, ecological, and the liberal intellectual milieus. But let us go back to the awareness of biological diversity social indicator. This indicator is made up of 3 sub-areas, that is knowledge, attitude, and willingness to act. For each of these sub-areas, requirements are set that correspond to the objectives of the national strategy on biological diversity. And based on these requirements, the indicator is calculated as, like you see here, the common denominator of all 3 areas. According to this definition, the level of the overall indicator is the percentage of persons who first can name at least one subcomponent of biodiversity, who can secondly express a positive attitude towards biodiversity, and who indicate third a high willingness to act to contribute the preservation of biological diversity. A comparison over time from 2009 to 2019 revealed that awareness of the importance of biodiversity has only slightly increased. Since the beginning of the survey in 2009 through to the values recorded in 2017, the overall indicator did only slightly increase. And the same is true with knowledge on biodiversity, which between 2009 and 19 remained almost on the same level. But compared to 2017 and also 2009, it's the willingness to act indicator that clearly increased by 13% over the whole period, and even by 7% between 2017 and 2019. So let's say it's behavior that counts, not pure communication of knowledge, but that arises the question, how can behavior, how can willingness to act be stimulated? It was already in one of our earlier studies, in the 2011 studies, that we asked people, can you imagine getting actively involved in the protection of nature? And it was found, and I think these results, they remain true in some way. It was found that 18% said, well, we already are active. But what was really an astonishing result is, or an astonishing amount was that another 30% said, well, we can imagine taking action for the protection of nature. Well, how can this potential be stimulated? Or the other way around, what might be obstacles hindering a commitment for nature conservation? The overarching reason identified as precluding an active commitment for nature conservation was a lack of time. I hope you can read what is written here, but I tell you the main categories. Other obstacles quoted were a feeling of not fitting in within a conservationist setting and a subjective lack of relevant know-how. Some 50% of the respondents are deterred by member fees and travel costs. And interestingly, it was 60% who quoted not knowing by whom and how to address to get committed. In total, the results also show high potential for voluntary commitment that might be mobilized, but they also make clear that offers are needed which do not require so much previous knowledge and time exposure. It's what we would like to call low threshold offers, niederschwellige Angebote in German. Another interesting aspect was how great is the concern about the way in which nature is treated globally and regionally. The finding was quite interesting, as the way in which nature is treated globally concerned people more than the way in which nature is treated regionally. 79% considered the way in which nature on Earth is treated to be extremely problematic, but were much less worried about the treatment of nature in the region. Another aspect is that the collective, that is achieved through joint efforts, the collective perceived behavioral control is valued higher than the individual. This is not very surprising given the size of the task, but what is interesting is that respondents tend to be of the opinion that conservation-friendly collective action is more effective in the global context than in the local context. 82% find that together, we as human beings can do something to protect nature in the world, just as many believe that we as human beings are capable of working together for global nature conservation. Whereas in the local context, only 67% believe in the achievement of objective and 62% in terms of action activation. The comparatively high degree of confidence in the perceived behavioral control of collective action in comparison to purely personal action suggests that nature conservation should point to the community character of nature conservation activities whenever this is possible and meaningful. Wherever the individual sees him or herself easily overwhelmed and doubts the effectiveness of individual action, confidence can be increased enormously if a collective effort is pointed out. On the other hand, the weaker assessment of the perceived behavioral control of collective as well as individual action at the regional level is as compared to the global may also be a cause of concern, as the present findings point towards a weaker capacity to mobilize individuals for regional nature conservation. Well, let us switch to wilderness and nature parks in Germany, another topic. Currently, we have 16 nature parks in Germany. That sounds much compared to Switzerland, but these national parks altogether cover only 0.6% of the land surface. It was these two national parks in the southwest, Black Forest, that in 2014, and Hunsrück-Hochwald in 2015, that were recently established as the latest, and about both a very controversial discussion was running in the public. Further, we have targets in our national strategy on biological diversity related to wilderness. We speak about the so-called 2% and the 5% target. 2% means that by the year 2020, I know it's had already passed, but it's the current strategy, nature shall be able to develop according to her own laws throughout at least 2% of Germany's national territory. As for the forests, it should be 5%. And by an own survey that was carried out, we know that by July last year, from this 5% or almost about 3.1% were achieved. So there still also remains a lot to do. So with regard to the two national parks under construction, let's say, in our 2013 study, we investigated the views and the arguments in favor of wilderness. Functional reasoning of wilderness areas in Germany met with strong support. More than 10 in 9 respondents respectively believe that wilderness areas provide an important refuge for animals and plants, an open space in the high-tech world in which to learn about Germany's nature in its pristine form. The protection of nature as a reason for having wilderness areas enjoys even greater acceptance here than its function as a social open space and educational archive for Germany's natural environment. But what is important, Wilderness has to be accessible to be accepted. 79% argued in favor of some form of access, be it by spatial pathways or assisted by a guide. Only 11% were in favor of unimpeded access. So communication, any communication of wilderness areas should cater to people's needs in respect of accessing and experiencing wilderness areas via appropriate opportunities for encounter, like pathways, guided tours, and so on. These findings, as I told, they came from a time just before the last 2 German national parks were established, and they served to underpin their establishment with further argument. One finding that made us really happy in our last study, 2019, was that we could show that the preference for wild nature has significantly increased since then. In 2015, 54% said they like nature more the wilder it appears, and this increased to 75% in the current survey. But we have to keep in mind, in contrast to 2019 survey, the 2015 nature awareness study was carried out in the summer rather than in the winter, and so it cannot be ruled out that the expressed preference for wild nature in winter 2019 is at least partly due to the change in time the survey was carried out. This shows also the difficulties in making the results of the different surveys really comparable. And let us have again here a brief look at the sinus milieus. It was noticeable that the personal appreciation for nature is by far the lowest here in the escapist milieu. 1 in 4 in this milieu, they stated they do not feel comfortable in nature. And this is probably mainly related to cultivated nature, which is perceived as being too restrictive and relating with too many restrictions. But it was remarkable that 81% of this escapist milieu, of this escapist milieu also state that they like nature more the wilder it is. And this kind of perception might also offer links to respective measures for experiencing nature. Last brief topic, that is urban nature. Probably you are aware that the year 2010 marked a threshold which was exceeded, as since then the majority of the world's population lives in urban spaces. As for Germany, about 75% of the population is living in towns and agglomerations, and so it's important for nature conservation to consider not only nature in the outskirts, but also in urban areas. So how important do people consider urban nature? The answers revealed that urban nature takes important functions, not just for society as a whole, but for the individual too. Recreation and relaxation receive the most important rating, just as frequently as quality of life, as being followed by health, space for sports and exercise, experiencing nature, and a space for meeting other people. So the different aspects of a multifunctional urban nature is demonstrated here and is shown as an important aspect. And let's say again, accessibility is an important aspect, as 61% and such a huge majority of the German people found it very important that as many parts of a town or city as possible should provide access for or to nature. It is fair to say that people make rather frequent use of urban nature, and that is what is more, we could also show that access to urban nature is sought far more frequently the larger the city is the city or town. But people seem to love tidy looking urban green, urban wasteland, in German Stadtbrachen, urban wasteland, that is land where nature is left to evolve spontaneously, may polarize the population. And so it's important to realize that 30% take a negative view of such urban areas that might, or these areas, they might also be important for urban biodiversity. As a consequence, it's important for urban planning to consider the possibility that urban wasteland can polarize the population, and it therefore makes sense to involve the population in relevant cases from the beginning, take their wishes and concerns seriously, and special attention should be given to highlighting the added value of urban wasteland for man and nature. The strong importance of urban nature for human beings we could show. This supported corresponding urban planning considerations. We took it as a strong argument for promoting the idea of green infrastructure also in urban areas, urban green infrastructure with respective concepts. Our findings provided also support for the ministries and governments' ideas of preparing a known national master plan for urban nature that included a set of respective measures and also opportunities for fundings. And it was a master plan that had to be approved by the German government, by the cabinet. And finally, special attention was paid to projects such as urban gardening or promoting urban wilderness in our funding activities. One project was Städte wagen Wildnis. It's a slogan, so difficult to translate. Was one of our projects to facilitate extensively our unused urban greens in 3 different towns. That was Dessau, Frankfurt, and Hanover. To come to an end to some take-homes, well, the nature awareness studies, they allow for monitoring nature awareness in the German populations, and they provide targeted information to underpin political and expert debates. I just showed some examples. One very important finding is that target group specific communication is necessary. We have to distinguish in between well-educated persons with high income, high level of consumption, but also an understanding of one's own responsibilities. Activities to protect nature should be promoted here, but also consequently demanded, as these people have high influence on society, and it's also ethical debates that should be promoted here. On the other hand, we have socially disadvantaged groups where experience of nature remains largely alien and impenetrable, and therefore these people can't really benefit from it. Here it's important still to raise awareness, but also and above all to provide openly and easily accessible offers close to the living environment. And finally, also some self-critical comment. We have to aware to put the right kind of questions, as the kind of questions may determine the kind of answers. So it's don't only ask what you expect. We had often internal discussions about that issue. And what I would have preferred is more open questions that would have been desirable with no fixed categories. But that is a question of effort concerning the feasibility of the study, but you have also to consider the time exposure of the respondents. So I also did my time exposure with you. I'm finished now for my part. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Beate. I think we can unshare the screen. Okay, great. So,
you did it away. I don't have to do now.
Yes, Sandra did it. So actually, I have some technical support by Sandra Wurzeler and Lina Torregrozza and Susan Zen. Thanks to them. So are there any questions? I don't know. Sandra, Lina, do you see some raised hands? Questions or comments to this very interesting. Okay, here is something from Jochen Jäger. Wait a minute, here.
Well, he asked, I recognize it in the chat, it popped out. He asked if the sample was the same over the years. No, that was not affordable. It was a random sample from the German population. It was selected by age, by gender and other terms, but that couldn't be afforded to keep the same people for this questionnaire over more than 10 years. I just mentioned it's several influences. It's also the time of the year when the survey is carried out and other influences. It's very difficult to make it really and strictly comparable. That's indeed.
Okay, I can perhaps read the next question from Felix Kiernast. How do the attitudes, for example, towards national parks, biodiversity and so on, change over time in the different milieu classes? So in other words, which milieu classes are most dynamic, which are static? Mm. Could you see this?
This social monitoring, we didn't carry it out for every aspect and for every theme. So we didn't ask about the consideration for national parks every year. It was, as I mentioned, it's the social indicator about nature awareness that we monitored for every year. But then this was added by changing topics. And as for the classes, well, I can't say it now from my mind in which classes there is the most dynamic. I think it's above all within the younger people, because we could observe, I didn't now relay to our nature awareness study, but here it was really astonishing that a very huge amount of younger people said we would like to engage for nature conservation. We are willing to act. It was far more than adult persons. And what we suppose is, I also showed from the adults, there was a kind of switch also in willingness to act from 2017 to 2019. And in this period, I don't know what happened in Switzerland, but in Germany, there were Fridays for Future demonstration, Friends of the Earth, Ende Gelände, and there were so many groups and demonstrations, which also raised a lot of public awareness. And we suppose that this also had a great influence on public attitudes, but also on willingness to act.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, now the questions are coming into the chat. So Marcel Hunziker has a question. How did you measure knowledge about nature? And how did you deal with the social desirability bias regarding behavior intentions?
Mm-hmm. Well, that is a specific question I would like to hand over to Andreas, because he is more involved in the methodological detail. It was my responsibility usually to present the results, but the conceptual framework and so on, that was done by our scientific staff.
Okay, so I guess this will come later on.
But probably Andreas can answer immediately. Briefly.
Okay. So perhaps Andreas can just give a short answer.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome from my side too to this talk here. Just to keep it brief, because I will present it later in more detail, we assessed knowledge about biodiversity just as a plain knowledge question about the term. Do people know and understand the term? What does biodiversity mean? And we oriented our analysis according to the definition given by the Convention on Biological Diversity and our own national strategy. What is biodiversity? It's the biodiversity of species. So between species diversity, within species diversity, so genetic diversity, and ecosystem diversity. So, and you can question that if this is the right way to assess knowledge and understanding. And I will talk about this later. And just to say something about the question that was before about the reagibility or changing of answers within the sinus milieus. This is a really interesting question. We have not assessed it in detail, so there's a lot of possibilities with the data sets that could be analyzed in a secondary analysis. But just from my understanding and knowledge that I gained over the last years, I wouldn't say it's milieu specific. It's related to the content of the topics and the questions, because for example, regarding the energy transition, we see changes and we see these changes then coupled to specific milieus. But it's not the way that specific milieus are more readable or changing than others. It's content and context specific.
Okay, thank you. Then we have another question from Janine Bolliger about more biodiversity, about the urban wasteland. Have you conducted any biodiversity assessment? So how much the wasteland contributes to urban biodiversity?
Well, there exist investigations, and there exist also, as for Germany, surveys on federal level, how many urban wastelands do exist all over Germany. I'm not sure about it's 40 or even 60,000 hectares. I don't have the exact numbers in my mind, but these surveys do exist. But that was not the issue of our project about nature awareness, definitely.
Okay. So perhaps in other studies. Then we have a question from Nicole Mattis. She is from the Federal Office of Spatial Development about the question type. Why did you not link more directly, so in combined situation, the desired benefits, what people value, to the necessary efforts, for example, additional payments? This would give further insights for policymaking. And then is another question from her, the sinus milieus, what is the real value added to these groups? Policies can often not be targeted to these types of group, or to the specific types of groups.
Mm-hmm. So as for the first question, as I already mentioned, I could only present you a very, very brief part of all the results we produced in the studies. And we also did investigations where we asked for the different types of willingness to act. For what actions would you like, for what type of actions would you like to engage? Would you be willing and able to pay? Who should pay primarily for nature conservation, and so on? There exist quite a lot of overviews and data. You can find them in the study, but sorry, that would have been too much in this overview here. But as for targeting policy action, I'm not so sure if this is true. Policy can address different groups in population. So what we did, also based on the results of our studies and in my responsibility while I was president of BFN, we established a known unit at BFN that deals with the social aspects of nature conservation, promoting these views that we have to develop targeted measures and targeted projects for different parts of the population. And we also try to provide policy advice in this respect. For instance, if we say politicians, it's important to focus not only on protected areas in the outskirts or national parks and so on, but also to focus and to do something for urban nature and for urban green infrastructure, because that is a kind of nature that is above all and a lot used by this disabled parts of the population. That is also one finding and one action that is addressed to policy that comes out from the study and is underpinned. But on the other hand, what is policy? Policy for us, even if BFN is a federal agency under the scope and the roof of the German Federal Ministry for Environment, it was not only just the ministry, but it was also stakeholders within the society. And here we collaborated a lot with different NGOs and so on. And it was also important to tell them and to tell other stakeholders who are involved in public education, who are dealing with young people and so on, what they could do in a targeted way to bring people closer to nature. It has to be distinguished. It was not our duty as a federal office to do this education on our own, but it was our duty to develop and to provide hints how to better do that as for nature conservation.
Okay, thank you. So we have two questions from the Federal Office of Environment that are very close to this. One is from Matthias Stremlo about how did the BFN approach these sinus milieus in their communication. I think you started to answer this question. And Johan Dupuy is asking, why did you take the sinus milieus for grouping and not the usual social classes with classical criteria, revenues, education, political preference, and so on?
This is a good bridge to Andreas, because he will now give you more insight and more detailed insight just in these sinus milieus. But let me say, so far it was a deliberate decision, because the sinus milieus, they are oriented more to lifestyle and consumption patterns and such things. And for us, it seemed more important than just this traditional stratification, like education, income, gender. We could also make surveys as for gender and these aspects of how do people think in bigger or in smaller towns and in rural areas. But for us, it seemed most important to focus on these lifestyle aspects. But it will be Andreas. I think now it's a good bridge who will give more insight into these topics.
Okay, thank you. However, I have still at least two more questions, and we still have some time. We are going now further to wilderness. So Felix Kiernas says that a key criterion for wilderness is no or low accessibility. However, people wish a good access. Would it therefore be necessary to better explain the concept of wilderness, or call it wild areas? Something?
Well, first of all, what is wilderness? We had also discussions about the definition of wilderness. There are different definitions. For me, wilderness is above all areas that can develop on their own without being actively influenced by humans, and above all, for which no targets are defined in advance. They are open by the direction where they shall develop. And I think this aspect that people would like to experience wilderness, this is one important finding if we really want to promote the idea of wilderness. And I think as often you can do one thing without neglecting the other. You can deliberately choose ways how to direct the people, what is called in German Besucherlenkung. I'm now not firm with the English term about
visitor management. Yeah.
Management. That is more in a general way, but direct people which ways they shall choose. And as, in my conviction, it is important not only to segregate areas, to close them for the people and say, so this is wilderness, and you have to keep away. If you looked, for instance, to the United States, they have a very interesting concept of wilderness areas, which is a known category of areas beside the national parks. As wilderness areas in the US, you are allowed to penetrate, but only on your own without any technical means. So you are allowed to experience this. And well, I think we should, if we want to increase the acceptance of wilderness, also in Middle Europe, we have to think about such concepts. It's not appropriate just to say we need be it 3 or 5 or any % of wilderness and exclude and keep the people and keep them out.
Yes, thank you. Marcel Hunziker had a question that goes in this direction. So about wilderness, we observe the same increase of general preference, but if it comes to new national parks, they fail. One of the main reasons is also access. But this is often only a problem for special interest groups, which manage to convince the majority. Is this the same in Germany, or about these interest groups and political decisions?
That is a very broad discussion, and I would like to suggest Marcel to deepen it in an appropriate scope. We have not enough time, but what I mentioned, as for the German national parks that have recently been established, we had also severe public discussions, and it was above all also people who felt restricted. It was people on site, not coming from outside, but people on site who felt restricted because they couldn't use their ways anymore. In Germany, it's also a big issue, hunting. That is also true for Switzerland, I think. But for Germany, it's important collecting wood for firing, for your home firing and so on. And so people were too much afraid to have too many restrictions to be kept out from nature. And I think it's important to take these concerns seriously and to develop concepts how to meet with them. Just to say, so here now a national park is established and you have to be kept out and everything is restricted. Anyway, that is a way that will fail. By the way, what is also interesting, it was every German national park that was recently established, it was always severe discussions. In the Northern Black Forest, we had discussions, the current Minister of the Environment of the federal state of Baden-Württemberg, Alexander Bonde, he was threatened personally by his family and his children and so on. It was really severe. But let me say, now as the national park is established, the discussions, they have stopped almost, because it's also that the advantages of this park have become evident. It's evident that there are more visitors, that there are more tourists, that there is a time of transition for the necessary restriction. That is also important, not to make them all at the same time, but to leave some time for transition. And so at the moment, it's running relatively smooth.
Okay, so thank you very much. There is one last question, then I have to stop the discussion, from Tamaki Omura from here, WSL. She said, your presentation showed that the lack of knowledge is a hurdle at several stages, volunteering, activism, and so on. You also recommend addressing different strata of the population with different measures. What recommendations does the study derive regarding improving knowledge that could be implemented at the school age level? This means before addresses become, the addressed people become member of a specific milieu, and these school level across the milieus.
Well, let me say, one of our main findings was or is, it's willingness to act that counts. So I say, and we said as one of our findings in the future, it's not about to neglect education, but education shouldn't mean only just transfer of knowledge, just teaching for a bilateral from one side to the other. We have and we should focus more how to teach acting. And that should be included also within education in schools, making children aware, well, telling them what is biodiversity, but then also taking them out, showing them concrete examples and creating possibilities for them how to experience biodiversity. It's essential, not just transfer of knowledge, but to promote the willingness to act. That is most of the most important findings.
Okay, thank you very much, Beate. This was a very interesting presentation. I have to cut here the discussion because now we will get some insight into the methodological background of these studies. I want to introduce our next speaker, Andreas Wilhelm Moos. He is graduate biologist and psychologist. He is the scientific officer of the Federal Agency for Agency for Nature Conservation in Germany for the division Nature and Society. He has specializations on evolution and biodiversity, so evolutionary biodiversity, and as well as organizational and clinical psychology, and about the impact of nature on the human psyche. He is coordinating and carrying out these nature awareness studies and doing in addition, research and communication projects on environmental ethics and religions. So it is a very interdisciplinary background. Thank you. And Andreas Moos, please share your screen. Please try to. Okay.
I hope you can see it.
Yes, we see it. Perhaps you can put it in the presentation mode.
Yeah. Do you see now the presentation mode?
Yes, now it's okay.
Great.
Okay, just go ahead.
Thank you, Sylvia and Beate. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to present results of the nature awareness studies. And today I would like to present you aspects of the methodological background related to what Beate Jessel already presented. So coming back to concepts and methods, Professor Jessel already stated it. We have a very in-depth questionnaire development regarding this study series. So every 2 years, the nature awareness studies are published by the Federal Ministry of the Environment and the Federal Agency for Nature Conservation in Germany. And to make this happen, to have a sound nature awareness study every 2 years, we start with an in-depth questionnaire development. So we have a circle of experts, professors from various kind of disciplines. It's very interdisciplinary to have experts regarding statistical analysis, social sciences, but also natural sciences, ecology, biodiversity, and bring them together to design a sound questionnaire, which will have about a 50 minutes questionnaire time to ask the respondents what they think about nature and biodiversity. And we have also a very complex process within the ministry and the agency. So all kinds of experts are involved in producing such a questionnaire. And after that, we do an in-depth pre-testing. At the beginning, we just had cognitive questionnaires, and we check if people do understand our questions or if there are misunderstandings. But at the moment, we also have a very in-depth quantitative analysis before we go into the field. So we test around about 200 people if they understand the questionnaire, and then we start the sampling. Every nature awareness study is representative for the German population. We ask around about 2,000 respondents. At the moment, for the current 2021 nature awareness study, we also have 2,400 respondents, and they are collected in a random sample, so to secure the representativeness. Usually, these interviews are done face-to-face, so these are real interviews where interviewers are going to the doors of the people and making these interviews with them. We also have a youth study, 2020, for the first time. This one was conducted via online questionnaires. The questionnaire has established sections for monitoring, so to create time rows. So every 2 years, some part of the questions are asked always and again to see if there's a change in the awareness and general attitudes, etc. But we also have new questions and new topics to make the study interesting for political decision makers. So what is going on in the field of environmental policy? And we try to capture that with our studies. So Beate Jessel already told you we have some areas with more focus, like protected areas in 2019 or 2013, the wilderness topic. So, and there was a question some minutes ago about assisting variables. So we do not only collect the social milieus concept, but this is what I will also present you and go deeper with. But we, like with every good questionnaire, we are collecting socio-demographic variables like age, income, sex, to make these basic analysis. And they are also of interest. But today we'd like to focus on the social milieux concept, because it's we're dealing with target group specific communication. And I think it's of some interest for you that this way of approaching nature awareness gives us the possibility to see that there is a split in nature awareness in the general population, as Professor Jessel already described you. We are also trying to do quality control with our questionnaires. I just give you an example about controlling social desirability. There also was a question about it some minutes ago. Social desirability is always a problem in questionnaires when you expect that people are giving you the answer you want to hear from them. And this is true for all questionnaires. And usually it's not assessed or controlled. I think this is something very good that we are trying to monitor this in some way. In the years 2013 and 2015, we had an in-depth analysis using a short scale of Winkler et al. That allows us to see the tendency of people giving social desirable answers. So social desirability means you are giving a person the answer, or the interviewer the answer you expect he or she wants to hear. And what we can see in our samples is that around about 2/3 of the population, or 65%, they do not show such an effect. So there is no social desirability, even in this topic of nature protection, which is highly prone for social desirable answers, because it's a social norm that protecting nature is a good thing. And saying that you do not want to protect nature, I think it takes some strength and some very these people must be very convinced to state something like this. And although this is the case, 65% we cannot see any effect. And we have 8% showing deception of themselves, so lying to themselves and also lying to others. And this group shows the highest amount of social desirability. But just to make it clear, as what we have seen for now, I do not think that social desirability is so much of a problem in this survey. Because it's context specific. I do not want to go too deep here. You can look it up in the in-depth studies in the internet. It's context specific. There are some areas like energy transition or attitudes towards economics, and where people see, okay, this is a larger picture and this is a hot topic, then they tend to give answers that are more social desirable, and in other cases not. But all in all, when you're comparing the results of people showing no effect compared to those of showing self-deception or deception of others, yeah, there is something in it, but it's not so problematic as you might think. So not everything is wrong because of the aspect of social desirability. So this was just a side event. So going back to the real topic here, target group specific communication. So one aspect to bring our data to life is to use this data for target group specific communication. And we, right from the beginning in 2009, we decided to use the social cultural classification or stratification of the CINUS milieus, which is widely applied in the sector of enterprises, so the automobile industry and whatever, to sell products to customers. So how to place a product into the market. And this is very, very successful. A concept like the CINUS milieu concept is used for that. And as Professor Jessel already stated, here you see the basic concept of the CINUS milieus. And what is important is that this is laid out between two axes. The x-axis is the basic values or values and lifestyle attitudes that people are having. And the y-axis is the social status. So people of lower status, middle class status, or higher economic status or social status. So going back to the basic axis, the x-axis of basic values, this is also linked to the development of values in our society, because you could see the traditional part of these basic values. So going to the left, lower left side of the slide, these are people that were born and raised in the Second World War or shortly after that, and they are characterized by very conservative values. And then in the 50s and 60s of the last century, we had a shift to individualism. So people try to live more their lives and try to practice self-realization, and the ego and the individual I becomes more important in these ages, the 50s and 60s. And the last column, reorientation, is that what we are living in right now, a very globalized world with a lot of multi-optional possibilities, and you can choose from various kinds of lifestyles and way to live your life. And this is especially true for the younger populations, having all these possibilities, deciding for different degrees at the universities, and so on and so on, and having access to a globalized world. So on the y-axis, the social status, this is not only the income. So lower people are not poorer than people of higher social status. They are also poorer regarding social connection, social connectivity. They do not have so much access to knowledge, understanding, social networks, and so on. While people at a higher level, they have very much access to social networks, influence into society, access to knowledge and information. And I just would give you a brief insight into these different milieus. So the percentage numbers here are representing the actual number of the milieus in the German population. But every 7 to 10 years, these milieu classification is changing, and the questionnaires are adapted from the sinus milieu to represent the new structure of the society. So what we are telling you here now is work in progress, and in the next nature awareness study, we will present you a slightly adapted milieu model. So let's go and make the circle. When we go in the lower left, we see the traditional milieu, so lower social status and traditional values. This is the security and order-loving wartime or post-war generation, and they are characterized by a blue-collar culture. When we're going up in the social status, we are having this established conservative milieu. So these are also conservative people, but they have leadership positions in society. They have a high income. They know success, and they aspire exclusivity and leadership. And when we are going now to more into the middle, to the modern modernization and individual part, we have the liberal intellectuals. So this is the liberal educational elite in our society. They have post-material roots, and they have this desire for self-determination. And for example, they could be music professors or whatever. So people combining leadership and self-determination with individualism. And also in the higher milieu classes, we have the social ecological milieu. So these are the bearers of political correctness, and they are well convinced of a socio-ecological transformation. Then also in the higher milieus, but the younger classes, we have this high achiever milieu. These are younger people having more global economic mindset. They are top performers. More far to right reorientation, we have the movers and shakers milieu. So these are the more creative young leaders. They are more concerned with designing and producing things, not so much about economic or political impact like the high achiever milieu. Then we are going down into socioeconomic status, and we have the middle class. So the adaptive preventist milieu, this is the ambitious young core of society. These are people that are having families, or starting to have a family and building houses and so on. This is the new middle class. Going farther down, we have this escapist milieu. So we are now in the lower social status. And this is the fun-oriented modern low middle class. and they are shunning conventions and behavioral expectations of the society. So having fun is very important to them, and being themselves, not according to behavioral expectations. And I think this is very interesting that we have these results concerning wilderness, and this escapist milieu is preferring wilderness. So you can see some kind of link between value systems here. And then going down to the precarious milieu, this is the lower class in our society. They have a lot of problems. They do have a very low income. They have strong anxieties about the future, and they are in search of social inclusion. So, and then we are going up a little bit and coming to the center of the population. And there we have the middle class, 13% of our population. So this is the modern mainstream. And these people in the middle of society, they are proponents of the social order. And first and foremost, they seek to lead a secure existence. So this was just a brief description of social milieus. I hope this gave you an insight how these milieus are created by social status and basic values. And it's more than just segmenting data sets according to social demographic values like income or age or gender, because here you have lifestyle groups, people that are trying to live a certain way of life. And it's not by chance that the industry and the enterprises are using systems like that to place their products. Beate Jessel already told you about the biodiversity indicator. So this is the old indicator we had so far. So how do people understand biological diversity? And I do not want to go into that because Beate Jessel already told you about it. The old indicator had 3 facets: knowledge, attitude, and behavior. Knowledge assessed as knowledge of the term. So what does biodiversity mean, and do you understand the term? Attitude, just general attitudes about biodiversity, and behavior as willingness to act. So what are people willing to do? And as Beate Jessel already told you, we can see with the old indicators some changes in biodiversity awareness on the general level. So in 2019, the overall indicator had 28% fulfillment in the general population. So this is here in the lower right corner of the chart, 28%. But when you're looking at the subscales, willingness to act, attitude, and knowledge, you can see that the sub-indicators are lying higher. And this is no wonder, because the total indicator is like this Venn diagram. You have to fulfill all these indicators to be counted as fulfilling the overall indicator. And what we can see here, the overall indicator changed just a little bit over time, most importantly between 2017 and 2019, but we see major shifts in willingness to act and to some degree also in the other scales, but willingness to act also made a shift. A questionnaire is not a scientific experiment where we can say what is the cause for an event like this. We just see correlations. But I think it's sound to speculate that the rising of Fridays for Future and these strong youth movements took their part here, because when you're analyzing this data in depth, you can see that willingness to act especially changed in the younger generations, people aged 18 to 29 years. So I think this makes sense. So, and now trying to link these results of the awareness indicator to the target group specific communication. Professor Jessel already showed you this chart, but I want to mention it here again and to link it to what I presented you some minutes ago. I think on the general level, it's interesting to see, just to see and realize that we are having this split in consciousness and awareness in society, that the upper milieus, like the liberal intellectual, the social ecological milieu, or the high achiever milieu, are showing much higher awareness for biological awareness in the general indicator and also in the sub-indicators when compared to the lower class milieus. So this is a basic result of our studies, and we already applied it in the agency, realizing that we must change our communication when we talk to people of lower classes. And we established the focus in our agency regarding social questions and social justice and nature conservation. This is something we are dealing with for some years now, and we try to broaden this topic to address the needs of these people. And as Beate Jessel already said in the take-home message, this is what is needed. They have to reconnect to nature, and if this is not happening, everything else is not leading anywhere regarding nature conservation. While the higher milieu is already expressing that they are willing to do something, so we should take them by their word. So this means another communication strategy. But now it's getting more complex. We are having a paradox here, a paradoxical situation, because the lower class milieus are also living in smaller flats. They are not driving cars, or if they have one, just one. They are not making extended air travels to foreign countries, but the higher classes are able to do so. And what matters is behavior. I'm showing here a chart relating what I already said to some very hard data. So people who earn do harm the environment more when you relating household income to energy consumption. What you can see here in this chart from our environment agency is that people earning more money, they also spending it for energy. And I could show you all kinds of charts. They are doing more travel by airplane. They are having more cars. They are living in bigger rooms and flats and houses. So there's this paradox situation that the higher social classes are stating they are more aware and they are more willing, but actually they are doing the opposite. And the lower social classes, they are not harming the environment and nature at that scale because they are not able to, and they are not stating willingness. So this is making the picture more complex. So, and what's important now, I think it's very clear that we have to address behavior and shift behavior, also in the higher classes, but also in the lower classes. And this is why we are stepping up the game right now in the federal agency, and also globally with help of the WWF, so the World Wildlife Fund. I would like to show you here now another approach of target group specific communication that we are working on right now. We are changing our biodiversity awareness indicator, and it's trying to assess it in a more in-depth way, and trying to link it to the latest results and understanding of environmental psychology. And what this means, I will show you now. Environmental psychology over the last 40 decades earned a lot of understanding and gained a lot of understanding how people behave and react, and what are the reasons for environmental friendly behavior. And in the last 4 decades, the last 40 years, two major theories were acknowledged. You see on the left side the norm activation theory, stating that our environmental behavior is shaped by our personal and social norms. So what do we think is right or wrong, and what do other people think is right or wrong, and this shapes our behavior. And the other plane, the other segment is the theory of planned behavior. You see it here in the lower left. So behavior is shaped by our intentions. What do we want to do? And what are we willing to do? What is our desire to do to have a behavior? What do we want to see in the world? And this behavior intention is shaped by attitudes. So do we have a positive or negative attitude towards something? And our perceived behavioral control. So do we think we can change our behavior? And do we think we have an impact? And you also see subjective norms here. This is the newer model of theory of planned behavior. So they are also acknowledging that norms have an effect, but in the original form, it wasn't there. So, and now the latest findings of meta-analytical reviews, I would like to show you here. Meta-analysis is showing us that all these psychological variables are true. I do not want to go too much into depth here, but it's very interesting what we're seeing here. On the right side, you see behavior. Behavior is shaped by intention. So we have a gatekeeper. Do you want to show this behavior? Are you willing to do something? Do you have the desire to see something in the world? So intention is the gatekeeper. And the next variables behind it are PBC, perceived behavioral control. So do you think you can do this behavior? Do you think you can make this happen? Sorry. Sorry. Then we have attitude. So do you think something is good or bad regarding an object of attitude? And then we have moral and social norms. So what do other people think and we think? And further back in the background, we see something like problem awareness. So this would represent knowledge or understanding, but not as assessed as we did all the time, not knowledge about the term of biodiversity, for example, but knowledge of problem awareness. So do we think that it is a problem that biodiversity is in decline? This is another other kind of knowledge than knowing the term biodiversity and what that biodiversity means. So not knowing facts, knowing problems. So, you can see here some kind of cascade or a hierarchy of variables. And what we are trying to achieve now is target group specific communication addressing these variables. And the new indicator, which will presented in the new study in the next months, will cover core variables like behavioral intention, attitude, perceived behavioral control, social norm, and problem awareness. And just to give you some examples for items, how we're trying to address it now, problem awareness needs something like biodiversity is decreasing on Earth. Can people agree on that or don't they agree on that? So here we are covering problem awareness. Social norm would be people who are important to me make most of their everyday trips, e.g. to work or to shops on foot or bike. So do people agree on that or not? So how is the social norm around these people? Perceived behavioral control would be something like paying for products that are produced in an eco-friendly way for me is very difficult or very easy. So do you think you can perform a behavior? And then we have attitudes. Preferring products that are produced in an eco-friendly way for me is very bad or very good. So what do you think of a behavior? And then we have intentions. This is something factual, what you can do. Reduce your meat consumption or be part of a group that helps protect a nature reserve. So are you willing to do that or are you not willing to do that? Sorry, Christine, I'm in a talk. I call you, bye. Sorry, it's the next it's the next talk. So these are the variables we're trying to assess. And what we're doing right now is we're not only assessing it in Germany, we're assessing it large scale in 10 other countries, from China over India to Colombia to Kenya and South Africa. And we're trying to build up a global monitoring of this state-of-the-art of environmental psychology. And the call you just witnessed is right about that. We are trying to bring this to the CBD Secretariat and have discussions how to monitor it on a global level to see how can we bring this topic forward internationally. And just I would like to close my talk with what could this mean for a new area of target group specific communication. What we were talking about some minutes ago about the CITES milieus, I think this is a very good framework to create target group specific communication using the knowledge of enterprises and economics to make product placement. But now I represented you another way of target group specific communication relating to psychology and what do we know about environmental friendly behavior. And what you can see here in these 4 boxes are 4 stages of change. In psychology, it is acknowledged that if you want to change behavior, for example, stop cigarette smoking, this is a good example from clinical psychology, you have passed to 3 levels. This is the 4th box off the left. Just read the bold titles in the lower branch of the boxes. Pre-decision. You have to realize that there is a problem. If you think that smoking is good and you like it, you do not want to change it. So pre-decision is realizing that you have a goal, that you want to make a goal intention, you want to change something. If you have a goal intention, you are going to the next level, pre-action. So what can you do to change your behavior? What can you do to stop smoking? Thinking about, maybe you go out, drink a coffee, eat something, yeah? Make a clear behavioral intention. If you have a clear behavioral intention, you go into the next phases, action, implementing your behavior. Make it a ritual, make it a habit. And if this is successful, you're coming to the last stage. You're establishing a new behavior. You're getting good at something, getting good at stopping smoking, or getting good at recycling, or getting good at informing other people about biodiversity. So establishing a new behavior. And what we are trying to do now is link all these topics. And I do not want to go into detail of all what you can see in the boxes here, but you see what is in orange here, the boxes in orange: goal intention, behavioral intention, and implementation intention. These are the breaking points. These are the core issues to change behavior. And environmental psychology is able to enable us to pass more easier through these stages. And if we know more about attitudes, perceived behavioral control, social and personal norms, we can assist people by communication, by coaching, or by education to establish better and new behavior.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Andreas Moos. You can unshare your screen. And meanwhile, there already some questions have come into the chat. Thanks again. So there is a comment from Marcel Hunziker about, thank you very much, Andreas Moos, for this excellent explanation around social desirability bias and how it was dealt with in the nature awareness studies. Very impressive. It would be nevertheless worthwhile to compare this effect over time, might increase as well, and between face-to-face and online interviewing, because there might be a bias to face-to-face. And in particularly regarding behavior intentions, as they increased much over the time than knowledge. This, do you want to add something? Or?
In general, no objection. I totally agree. I could talk an hour now about this, just to make it brief. I'm glad that we were able to assess social desirability, because you must know, when we're creating such a questionnaire, there's a lot of discussion what to put into such a questionnaire, and it was a fight to put in this monitoring instrument, because there's a trade-off effect. Do we put in monitoring instruments, or do we put in questions regarding topics like energy transition or wilderness or whatever? So it's good that we already achieved it. But I totally agree. I'm not satisfied that we're only having it in the year 2013 and 2015. It should be steadily in the questionnaire. But this is some in a micro-political argument within the agency what to put in there. I'm glad that we are having these data, because most questionnaires and surveys do not assess it. And absolutely true. It would be interesting to see how this is changing over time. Well, I just recommend you to read the scientific reports on that. We see all kinds of subliminary results, for example, like differences between genders or income groups. What I would like to state out, most importantly, social desirability is strongly affected by the topic. So are we talking about energy transition, or are we talking about, are you lucky being in nature? Yeah. This is no problem if you're telling, no, I don't like it so much. But if you're telling people, no, I disagree with the energy transition, then it's clear that this is going up. So I totally agree. And what you said about comparing online surveys and face-to-face interviews, absolutely. I think what is happening with the pandemic right now, I think everybody knows this is a very problematic time we are living in. But just to see the light at the end of the tunnel, because of the lockdown in the last year, we made a decision to also start online surveying the mature or adult population. And the new nature awareness study will present an equal sample, 1,200 respondents face-to-face and 1,200 online. And it's really amazing what I can see right now. We have these two balanced data sets, and we will be able to make scientifically sound comparison of the methods. And so we have built up a nexus, and we can look at from every direction now. And this will be really interesting. And I would like to stay in touch with you and just absorb what will come out in the next weeks.
Yes, yes, really, because we really envy you for this great sample. So there are still other questions. Jochen Jäger has two questions. The first is, there should be confidence intervals or a test if the differences are statistically significant between years. And the other question is, which of these differences between the milieu groups are statistically significant?
All right. We are doing in-depth statistical analysis for every study within the study, within socio-demographic groups or social milieus. This is what you have seen in the charts when it was colored in May green or lighter or more yellowish green. This was in a chi-square testing. It was overrepresented at 5% or 1% error. So do we have a 99% confidence interval or 95% confidence interval? So is it highly significant or just significant? And we're doing it also for the lower bound. So is it underrepresented or highly underrepresented? So this was the more bluish green colors. We are doing this for every study. In selected cases, we are also doing these tests between the years, but this is not what you're seeing within a published study. This is what you are seeing in scientific reanalysis or scientific articles placed in peer-reviewed journals. This is what we are also trying to bring this study more into the scientific broader landscape. And this is what is happening. And then you can see results like that.
Okay, thank you. I have, because we are officially at the end of our time, but there are still at least two questions. So there is one question from Matthias Buchecker that I want to ask you. He wonders whether willingness to behave is a very reliable parameter. Why not measure reported environmental behavior of different effort size, as perhaps recommended by Florian Kaiser? I don't know if you know him.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
We're all in one group of environmental psychologists in Germany. We're working on these topics. Thank you so much for these amazing questions. I'm thinking all day, all night long about this. This could be another talk about an hour. Just to make it brief. You also have a problem when you're asking people about what they have done. What they have done is very often not as sound as a report as asking the people what they are willing to do. But what they are willing to do, this is what they are willing to do. It's one level. But when you're asking them what you have done, they have problems of memory, or they value different what is important now at the moment. And we cannot control what they have truly done. So saying what you have done is not true behavior. In a perfect experiment or perfect situation, we would monitor behavior. And I do not want to tell too much because there will be publications coming out. We tried to survey quasi-behavior, or we tried to make an experiment on this in the questionnaires. We asked the respondents, are they willing after the questionnaire to correct and give us feedback on some nature conservation brochures and publications. And are you willing, every of them would take 10 minutes time. So are you willing to give us feedback on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6? So six feedbacks would take an additional hour after the questionnaire. So this is real behavior. Are the people willing to work more? And what I can tell you right now, what we can see, not to make it too broad, it's really interesting that people are very willing to do a lot for nature conservation. We have a very good average value, and we are working on this topic, but it would take at least 2 hours and a second talk to go into deeper here.
Yes, I guess so. But we are really keen of getting in closer touch with you. So the last question is from Jochen Jäger. He thanks for your presentation, and he asks if you have studied any relationships between several variables you have measured, other than the membership to a particular milieu class.
Yeah, for sure. What you're seeing here with the psychological setup, I think it's the major advance that we can see all these psychological variables in interplay. What I have presented you was a network of variables from the last meta-analysis from 2007 from Professor Bamberg and Moser. And Professor Bamberg is the one I'm working very closely with. He's from the University of Applied Sciences and he's an environmental psychologist. And the great thing is we will see all these psychological variables in interaction. And what is really interesting to see, how is perceived behavioral control shaping attitudes, or how is the interplay of behavioral control in interplay with attitudes or social norms? How is this shaping behavior? And I can tell you there are really interesting results going to be published in the next weeks and months. I cannot tell you right now because they must be published peer-reviewed, but it's really interesting. And not only for this case, all the other variables, gender, income, we are always trying to see the interplay of these variables.
Yes. Thank you very much. So Jochen said, but now you didn't present any results of these, but I think this is just because of time, and we agreed on what you were talking about. I thank both speakers very much for these interesting talks, and I thank the audience very much for the very vivid discussion. And obviously we could spend hours and days and nights on discussing further, but luckily we have your contact data, and we are all able to stay in touch with you both. So thank you very much. And herewith, I want to close this webinar. Thanks a lot and guten Appetit.
Thank you very much. All the best. Bye-bye.